The surgical scar across my abdomen still ached from where doctors had removed shrapnel, remnants from my final deployment overseas. My own son had thrown me out while I was still recovering, claiming he needed my house for his growing family. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't just his mother. I was also his landlord. The building housing his successful architectural firm had been in my name for over 15 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Katherine Jennings. For 22 years, I served as a combat medic in the Army, saving lives in 3 different war zones while raising my son Andrew alone. His father left us when Andrew was just 4 years old, disappearing overseas with a flight attendant and never sending so much as a birthday card. I hadn't planned on being a single mother with a military career, but I adapted. Between deployments, I took every moment to be present for Andrew, helping with science projects, cheering at soccer games, and teaching him to drive in empty parking lots on Sunday mornings. During my deployments, my sister Diane stepped in, keeping our little family functioning while I served. When Andrew graduated with honors and earned a full architectural scholarship to Westland University, I felt a fierce pride that made all those years of sacrifice worthwhile. He married Vanessa during his final year of grad school, a polished, ambitious woman from a wealthy family who never seemed quite comfortable in my modest home with its military memorabilia and practical furniture. 2 years ago, I finally retired as Command Sergeant Major, settling into civilian life in the same 3-bedroom house where I'd raised Andrew. I had my pension, some savings, and a handful of investment properties I'd quietly acquired over the years, including the converted warehouse downtown that housed Andrew's now thriving architectural firm. I never told him I was his landlord. The building was held through a limited liability company, with the actual management handled by a property management firm. I wanted him to succeed on his own merits, without feeling indebted to me. It was my safety net, both for him and for myself. The trouble began 3 months ago when I started experiencing severe abdominal pain. At first, I dismissed it as nothing. Military life teaches you to push through discomfort. But when I collapsed while tending my garden, Diane rushed me to the VA hospital. The scans revealed what the doctors called a concerning development. We found metal fragments that have shifted position, the surgeon explained, pointing to bright spots on my scan. Shrapnel from your injury in Kandahar. It migrated dangerously close to your liver. We need to operate soon to remove it. I called Andrew that evening from my hospital bed, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. The VA doctors want to perform surgery next week, I explained. Recovery will take about 6 weeks. I might need some help around the house afterward. Surgery? His voice sounded distracted, office noise in the background. Can't they just prescribe something? The timing is really bad, Mom. Vanessa and I just found out we're expecting twins, and we're looking at larger houses. It's shrapnel removal, not a headache, I replied, trying to keep the edge from my voice. The fragments could lacerate my liver if they're not removed. Of course. Sorry, he said, though he didn't sound particularly concerned. Look, I'm heading into a client meeting. Let's talk about this tomorrow. Andrew never called back. Instead, Vanessa texted 2 days later. So sorry to hear about your health scare. Andrew's swamped with the Henderson project. Can you keep us updated? The surgery was scheduled, and Diane offered to stay with me during recovery. You were there when I went through my divorce, she said firmly. Now it's my turn to help you. The procedure took longer than expected. The shrapnel had been embedded deeper than the scans indicated, requiring more extensive work than planned. When I woke in recovery, groggy and in pain, Diane was there holding my hand. Andrew wasn't. He visited once during my 5-day hospital stay, arriving with a small bouquet and leaving within 20 minutes, constantly checking his phone. The Henderson project is at a critical stage, he explained, not quite meeting my eyes. and Vanessa's having terrible morning sickness with the twins. I nodded, understanding the pressures of his life even as disappointment settled in my chest. I should be back on my feet in a few weeks, I assured him. When I returned home, Diane stayed with me for the first week, helping with everything from medication management to grocery shopping. By the second week, I could move around carefully, on my own, and she returned to her job with a promise to check in daily. That's when Andrew and Vanessa appeared at my door one evening, their expressions a careful blend of concern and determination. "Mom, we need to discuss something important," Andrew began as they settled onto my living room sofa. "With the twins coming, we've been looking at larger houses, but the market is insane right now." Vanessa nodded, one hand resting on her still flat stomach. "We've crunched the numbers every way possible, and we just can't afford what we need without overextending ourselves." I could sense what was coming even before Andrew cleared his throat and continued. "We've been thinking, your house has 4 bedrooms and you're here all alone. It would make perfect sense for you to move into something smaller and more manageable, especially after this health scare. We could buy this place from you, at market value, of course. Or," Vanessa added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you could gift it to us as an early inheritance and avoid the tax implications. You could find a nice little condo near the VA facilities." I looked between them, searching for any recognition of what they were asking. This wasn't just a house. It was my home, filled with memories of raising Andrew, of recovering between deployments, of building a life against the odds. "I'm not ready to move," I said simply. "This surgery was serious, but I'm recovering well. The doctors expect me to return to normal activities within a month." Andrew's face tightened. "Mom, be reasonable. This house is too big for you to maintain. You're not getting any younger, and with your medical issues..." "My medical issues are the result of shrapnel I carried in my body for 15 years while serving my country," I interrupted, my military bearing straightening my spine despite the pain. "I'm 58, not 88, and I'm perfectly capable of maintaining my home." The conversation ended in strained silence, but I could tell by their expressions that this wasn't the end of the discussion. I just didn't realize how quickly things would escalate. 3 days later, I returned from a follow-up appointment at the VA to find an envelope taped to my bedroom door. Inside was a formal letter giving me 60 days' notice to vacate the property. The letter explained that Andrew had consulted property records and discovered that when his father abandoned us, he had never legally relinquished his ownership in the house. Apparently, Andrew had tracked down his father, who had signed over his portion of the property to his son. According to the letter, Andrew now owned 50% of my home and was exercising his right to force a sale. I sat heavily on my bed, the surgical incision throbbing as my blood pressure rose. All those years of sending money to a lawyer to handle the divorce and property settlement, and somehow this detail had been missed? It seemed impossible, yet the documents looked legitimate. I called Diane, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "He's trying to force me out of my own home," I said when she answered. "While I'm still recovering from surgery." Her outrage matched my shock. "That ungrateful little..." She caught herself. "This can't be legal, Katherine. We need to talk to a lawyer immediately." But before I could even arrange a legal consultation, things took an even more painful turn. I woke the next morning to find Andrew and a professional moving crew in my house, boxing up my belongings. "What are you doing?" I demanded, clutching my robe around me, aware of how vulnerable I looked with my hair uncombed and surgical dressing visible beneath my nightclothes. "We found you a place," Andrew said, not quite meeting my eyes. "A nice assisted living community that has an opening. Vanessa and I will cover the first 3 months while you get settled. The moving crew will handle everything. You don't need to lift a finger." "Assisted living?" I nearly choked on the words. I don't need assisted living. I need my son to respect my home and my recovery. He finally looked at me then. His expression, a mixture of determination and something that might have been guilt. This is happening, Mom. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but by the end of the day, you'll be settled in your new place. The realtor is already scheduled to list the house next week. In that moment, looking at the stranger, my son, had become something inside me broke. And something else, something forged in military discipline and battlefield resilience, hardened into preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I reached for my phone to call the police, but Andrew stepped forward. They can't stop this, Mom. I have documentation of my ownership, and I'm concerned about your ability to care for yourself. I've spoken with your doctor about your recent confusion and memory issues. What confusion? What memory issues? I was practically shouting. Now, he lowered his voice. The doctor suggested these might be side effects of your medication or possibly early signs of cognitive decline. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I realized then he was gaslighting me, creating a false narrative to justify his actions. My mind raced through my options, military training kicking in, assess the situation, identify resources, formulate a tactical response. Rather than escalating the confrontation, I nodded slowly. Let me get dressed and pack a few personal items. In my bedroom, I quickly dressed and gathered essential documents, my military records, property deeds, financial information, and slipped them into a leather portfolio. I sent a quick text to Diane. Being forced out. Call Attorney Martinson. We'll contact you soon. Then, with as much dignity as I could muster, I walked out of my home of 30 years, past the son I had raised alone, and into an uncertain future. What Andrew didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that Command Sergeant Major Katherine Jennings had survived much worse than this betrayal, and I was far from defeated. As the assisted living facility's doors closed behind me, I already knew my next move. The property management company for the building housing Andrew's architectural firm would be receiving some very specific instructions from their actual client, Mai. The Mountain View Assisted Living Facility was clean, well-maintained, and utterly depressing. My apartment consisted of a bedroom barely large enough for a twin bed and dresser, a bathroom with safety bars installed everywhere, and a sitting area furnished with generic pieces that had likely witnessed the final years of dozens of residents before me. The facility director, Mrs. Patel, seemed genuinely confused by my presence. "You're remarkably independent for our community," she noted while showing me around. "Most of our residents require significantly more assistance." "That's because I don't need to be here," I replied, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. "My son seems to think otherwise." She gave me a look of understanding that made my chest tighten. "We see this more often than you'd think, Ms. Jennings. Adult children making decisions that perhaps prioritize their convenience." After she left, I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, still fighting waves of shock and betrayal. The surgical incision across my abdomen throbbed, a physical manifestation of my emotional pain. I hadn't felt this vulnerable since those first terrifying months as a single mother with an infant and deployment orders. But I wasn't that young, overwhelmed woman anymore. I was Command Sergeant Major Katherine Jennings, retired, and I had spent decades developing resilience and strategic thinking. This was just another battlefield, albeit one I never expected to face. I took stock of my resources. I had my military pension, my investment properties, including Andrew's building, my savings, my military and VA connections. Most importantly, I had the truth on my side. My phone chimed with a text from Diane. "Spoke to Martinson. He can see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Do you need me to pick you up?" I texted back, "Yes, and bring my spare laptop from your house. Don't tell Andrew you're in contact with me." The next step was the hardest. I needed to ask for help, something my military career and single motherhood had taught me to avoid whenever possible. Soldiers didn't complain. They adapted and overcame. Mothers didn't burden others. They found solutions. But this situation required resources beyond what I immediately had at hand. I needed allies. First, I called Colonel James Whitaker, now retired but formerly my commanding officer and longtime mentor. Our friendship had sustained us both through multiple deployments and personal challenges. He answered on the second ring. "Katherine, been too long. How's civilian life treating you?" The familiar gruffness of his voice nearly undid me. "Not well, Jim. I need your help." I briefly explained the situation: the surgery, Andrew's betrayal, the forced relocation. Jim's silence as I spoke was punctuated only by occasional sounds of outrage. That ungrateful little... He stopped himself. "What do you need from me, Katherine?" "Legal recommendations, for starters. My regular attorney handles property matters, but this situation seems to warrant someone with experience in elder law and real estate disputes. And possibly temporary housing. This assisted living facility costs $4,000 a month, and while I can afford it short-term, it's draining resources I'll need for the legal fight." "Consider it done," Jim said without hesitation. "My daughter-in-law specializes in elder law. I'll have her call you today, and our guest house is yours for as long as you need it. Caroline would love the company." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you, Jim. I don't take this offer lightly." "Katherine," his voice softened. "You patched me up in Fallujah and then spent 3 days by my hospital bed making sure I wasn't neglected during the evacuation. This doesn't even begin to balance the scales." My next call was to Master Sergeant Maria Delgado, who had served under my command and now worked in Veteran Services Administration. Maria had a gift for navigating bureaucratic labyrinths and a fierce loyalty to those who had served with integrity. "Command Sergeant Major," she answered formally, a habit neither of us had broken despite our retirement. "Maria, I need your expertise," I said, explaining the situation. Her response was immediate and unhesitating. "I know exactly which VA programs might apply here, ma'am. There's emergency housing assistance for veterans with health complications, and legal aid specifically for situations involving potential financial exploitation of veterans. I'll email you the application forms within the hour." I hesitated before making my next call. Dr. Lydia Chen had been not just my physician, but a friend during my last deployment. Now working in the VA hospital's administration, she understood both the medical and bureaucratic aspects of veteran care. "The timing of Andrew's claim about your confusion and memory issues is extremely suspicious," Lydia said after I explained the situation. "I'd like you to come in for a full cognitive assessment, not because I believe there's any issue, but to document your mental clarity. If he's building a case to control your assets based on false claims about your competence, we need to counter it immediately with medical evidence." By the end of the day, I had appointments scheduled with Lydia, Jim's daughter-in-law, attorney Sarah Whitaker, and a VA housing coordinator. My military network had mobilized around me with an efficiency that brought tears to my eyes. But there was one call I still needed to make, one that filled me with both dread and determination. I needed to contact Warren Mitchell, my property manager, about the building that housed Andrew's architectural firm. Warren answered with his usual brisk efficiency. "Mitchell Property Management." "Warren, it's Katherine Jennings." "Mrs. Jennings, it's been a while. Is everything all right with the Westbrook Street property?" He referred to the converted warehouse where Andrew's firm operated. "The property is fine, Warren, but I need to discuss some significant changes to our arrangement." I explained that I wanted a complete audit of the property's financial history, current market value assessment, and copies of all lease agreements. I did not explain why. "Of course, Mrs. Jennings. I can have that for you by tomorrow afternoon. Will you be stopping by the office?" "No," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. "I've had some health issues recently. Could you send everything to my email?" And Warren, I'd appreciate your discretion. This is a delicate family matter. His voice shifted, sensing the gravity of my request. Absolutely, Mrs. Jennings. Complete confidentiality. After hanging up, I sat in the sterile assisted living room, staring at the generic landscape prints on the wall. The weight of what I was contemplating, using my ownership of the building to counter Andrew's actions, felt both justified and painful. I had never wanted to use my position as his landlord as leverage. It was meant to be a safety net, not a weapon. But he had left me no choice. My phone rang again. Unknown number. Katherine Jennings, I answered cautiously. Ms. Jennings, this is Sarah Whitaker, Jim's daughter-in-law. I understand you need legal assistance urgently. Her voice was younger than I expected, but carried the confidence of someone accustomed to fighting difficult battles. I found myself explaining the situation for what felt like the 10th time that day. Let me be clear, Sarah said when I finished. Your son removed you from your home while you were recovering from surgery, placed you in an assisted living facility against your will, and potentially lied about your mental competence to justify his actions? That's correct. And you own the building where his business operates? Yes, through an LLC. He doesn't know I'm his landlord. There was a brief silence before Sarah spoke again. Ms. Jennings, what your son has done potentially— I don't want my son in legal trouble, I said quickly, surprising myself with the protective instinct that remained despite everything. I just want my home back, and for him to understand the consequences of his actions. I understand, Sarah replied, her tone softening slightly. But we need to be prepared for all possibilities. Your son has taken aggressive action, and we need to respond accordingly to protect your interests. After arranging to meet her the following day, I ended the call and finally allowed myself a moment of complete vulnerability. In the privacy of this room that wasn't mine, surrounded by furniture that held no memories, I wept for the son I thought I knew, for the betrayal that cut deeper than any battlefield injury, and for the fight that lay ahead. The tears lasted exactly 5 minutes. Then, as I had done countless times during my military career, I wiped my face, straightened my spine, and began to plan my next moves. Command Sergeant Major Jennings might be wounded, but she was far from defeated. Tomorrow, I will begin gathering intelligence and organizing my resources. In 2 days, I would move to Jim and Caroline's guest house. In a week, I would have a complete understanding of my legal position regarding both my home and Andrew's building. And then, when the time was right, my son would learn a valuable lesson about underestimating the woman who had raised him, a woman who had commanded troops in combat zones, saved lives under fire, and built a life for them both through sheer determination and grit. He thought he was dealing with a vulnerable, aging mother. He was about to discover he was facing a seasoned strategist. The next morning, Diane arrived at Mountain View promptly at 9:30 a.m., her expression darkening as she took in the institutional surroundings. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, watching. An elderly man struggled down the hallway with a walker. "You don't belong here, Katherine." "Clearly," I replied, gathering my documents. "But it's temporary." In the car, Diane handed me my spare laptop and a small duffel bag. "I packed some extra clothes and your favorite tea. I also brought these." She pulled out a manila folder. "Copies of your house deed and the divorce settlement from storage. I figured they might be useful." I squeezed her hand, grateful beyond words for her foresight. "You've always been 2 steps ahead." "One of us has to be," she replied with a sad smile. Attorney Sarah Whitaker's office was located in a renovated Victorian house downtown, the interior transformed into a modern law practice while maintaining its historic character. Sarah herself defied my expectations. Rather than the stern, middle-aged lawyer I'd imagined, she was a poised woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a direct manner. "Ms. Jennings," she greeted me, "I've reviewed the documents you emailed last night. I have several concerns about how your son has proceeded." We settled in her office, where she laid out a series of legal folders. "First, regarding your home. I've examined the property records and the divorce decree. Your ex-husband did retain a technical 50% interest in the property, but the decree clearly stated that you had exclusive right to occupancy for life, plus the right to any proceeds if you decided to sell." Hope flickered. "So Andrew can't force me out?" "Not legally, no. Even if his father transferred his interest to Andrew, the occupancy right remains yours. That's a separate issue from ownership." She tapped a document. "Furthermore, removing you from your home while you're recovering from surgery and placing you in assisted living without proper medical justification potentially constitutes elder abuse under state law." "I'm only 58, I pointed out. Sarah smiled thinly. "The term is somewhat misleading. Elder abuse laws often apply regardless of age when someone exploits a person who is vulnerable due to health conditions or disability." She shifted to another folder. "Now, regarding the building that houses your son's business. As the sole owner of the LLC that holds the property, you have considerable leverage. The current lease agreement includes a clause allowing for termination with 90 days' notice or immediate termination in cases of illegal activity on the premises. I don't want to ruin my son's business," I said quickly. "I just want my home back." "Of course," Sarah nodded. "But we should understand all available options. Sometimes demonstrating what you could do is enough to bring the other party to the negotiating table." By the end of our meeting, we had established a clear strategy. Sarah would file for an emergency injunction preventing any sale or transfer of my home, while simultaneously preparing a cease and desist letter regarding my unlawful removal from the property. "What about Andrew's claims about my supposed cognitive issues?" I asked. "That's our next stop," Sarah said, checking her watch. "Dr. Chen is expecting us at the VA hospital in 30 minutes for your cognitive assessment." The assessment was thorough, but straightforward. Dr. Chen administered a series of standardized tests measuring memory, executive function, reasoning, and judgment. My military training had prepared me for far more stressful evaluations. "As I expected," Dr. Chen announced when we finished, "you're not only cognitively intact, but functioning above average for your age group. I'm documenting this officially and will prepare an affidavit stating that there is absolutely no medical basis for questioning your capacity to make decisions or live independently." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "Katherine, what your son is attempting is unconscionable. Using false claims about cognitive impairment to control an older adult's assets is unfortunately common, but it's no less reprehensible." I nodded, the reality of what Andrew was willing to do still difficult to fully process. "I just don't understand how he could change so much. This isn't who I raised him to be." Dr. Chen's eyes softened. "People reveal themselves under pressure. Sometimes, not even in ways they recognize in themselves." By late afternoon, Warren Mitchell had delivered the property documents I'd requested to my email. I reviewed them at a quiet coffee shop near the VA hospital, Diane sitting protectively beside me. The building that housed Andrew's architectural firm, Barrett Design Associates, was worth considerably more than when I'd purchased it 15 years ago. The downtown area had gentrified, property values had soared, and I'd made strategic improvements to the building that had attracted premium tenants. Andrew's firm occupied the entire third floor and half of the second, paying rent. That was slightly below market rate, a small anonymous gift from mother to son. The lease was due for renewal in 4 months. As I scrolled through the financial records, a notification appeared on my phone. A social media alert for Andrew's name. Curious, I tapped it open. My coffee cup froze halfway to my mouth. Thereon, the screen was Andrew and Vanessa, standing in what was unmistakably my living room, now stripped of my possessions. Vanessa was gesturing excitedly to a designer who was taking notes. The caption read, "Beginning renovations on our new family home. So blessed to be expanding just in time for the twins. Chuck new chapter. Chuck home improvement." The post was less than an hour old. "They're already redecorating," I whispered, showing Diane the phone. "My medical equipment isn't even cold in the donation bin, and they're already tearing up my home." Diane's face flushed with anger. "The absolute nerve." I continued scrolling through comments, a masochistic impulse I couldn't resist. "Such a gorgeous space. Can't wait to see what you do with it," wrote one friend. "Perfect timing. The universe provides," commented another. Then a comment from Vanessa's mother. "So happy you were able to find the perfect solution. Your mother-in-law will be so much happier in a place where she has proper care." Andrew had replied, "It was a difficult decision, but Mom's health has to come first. The assisted living community has excellent medical staff and activities to keep her engaged. This way everyone wins." The casual lies, so smoothly delivered, felt like physical blows. He was constructing a narrative where he was the concerned son, making difficult but necessary decisions for my welfare, while simultaneously benefiting from my home. As I stared at the phone, another notification appeared. A direct message from an unfamiliar name, Cynthia Horowitz. "Ms. Jennings, you don't know me, but I work at Barrett Design as an administrative assistant. I overheard something today that disturbed me greatly." Mr. Barrett was on the phone with someone discussing liquidating his mother's assets and managing her financial affairs while she's incapacitated. He mentioned power of attorney paperwork. "I know this is inappropriate to share, but my own grandmother was exploited by relatives, and I couldn't stay silent. I hope you're well." My hands trembled so badly I had to set the phone down. "He's going after my savings, my investments, everything." Diane read the message and immediately pulled out her own phone. "I'm calling Sarah right now. We need to move faster." While she spoke with the attorney, I forced myself to breathe deeply, counting backward from 100 as I'd taught wounded soldiers to do when controlling panic was essential for survival. By the time I reached 43, a plan was forming. I opened my email and composed a message to Warren Mitchell with specific instructions about the property housing Andrew's firm. I requested a complete inspection of the building, focusing on the third and second floors, checking for any. I wasn't planning to evict my son, not yet. But I needed to understand exactly what leverage I had, and I needed Andrew to begin feeling the first tremors of uncertainty beneath his feet. My next call was to Master Sergeant Delgado at the VA. "Maria, I need to act quickly to protect my assets. How soon can I meet with the VA legal aid team about placing a freeze on my accounts?" "I've already scheduled you for tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., she replied. "After our conversation yesterday, I anticipated you might need expedited assistance. By evening, when Jim and Caroline Whitaker came to transport me to their guest house, I had initiated protective measures for my financial accounts, filed a complaint with Adult Protective Services about my forced relocation, and instructed Warren to schedule his building inspection for the following day." As we drove away from Mountain View Assisted Living, I looked back at the facility with mixed emotions. Part of me felt guilty for the residents who truly needed the services there, but lacked the resources or support to fight back against circumstances that had brought them to this place. Another part felt a surge of determination that my case might eventually help others in similar situations. Jim seemed to read my thoughts. "You know, Katherine, what you're going through isn't just about you and Andrew. Every time someone fights back against this kind of exploitation, it creates ripples, makes it harder for the next person to be victimized." "I hope so," I said quietly, "because right now, all I can think about is how thoroughly my son betrayed me, not just with actions, but with lies that paint me as declining and incapable." Caroline reached back from the front seat and squeezed my hand. "The truth has a way of surfacing, especially when it has warriors like you fighting for it." As we pulled into their driveway, my phone chimed with another social media notification. Against my better judgment, I looked. Andrew had posted a photo of himself sitting at his office desk, expression serious and professional. The caption read, challenging day-balancing work responsibilities with family care decisions. Grateful for our Barrett design team's understanding as we navigate this difficult time. Family, first, Talon work-life balance. The calculated public image. Building, using my supposed condition as a stepping stone for his professional reputation, was the final cut in a day of 1,000 small slices to my heart. I closed the app and tucked the phone away, reminding myself that tears wouldn't help. Me now. What I needed was clarity, strategy, and the courage to confront the painful truth. The son I had raised, sacrificed for, and loved unconditionally had revealed himself to be someone I barely recognized, someone willing to discard me for convenience and financial gain. Tomorrow would be soon enough to continue the fight. Tonight, I would allow myself this brief sanctuary, gathering strength for the battles ahead. The Whitakers' guest house was a charming cottage nestled at the edge of their property, surrounded by towering oak trees and flowering shrubs. It offered both privacy and proximity, exactly what I needed during this precarious time. "We've stocked the refrigerator and pantry," Caroline said, showing me around. "The security system is connected to the main house. Jim's added you to the account so you can arm and disarm it separately." I was touched by their thoughtfulness. "This is more than generous." "Nonsense," Jim replied gruffly. "It's what friends do." After they left, I stood in the quiet kitchen, feeling a moment of peace for the first time since finding that eviction notice. Here, at least, I was safe, my autonomy respected. It was a stark contrast to the institutional control of Mountain View and the violation of trust by my own son. The next morning arrived with gray skies and steady rain, matching my mood as I prepared for a day of legal and financial maneuvering. Sarah picked me up at 7:30 for our VA legal aid appointment, her professional demeanor reassuring. "I've reviewed all your documentation," she said as we drove. "We have a strong case for emergency intervention regarding both your residence and financial assets." The VA legal aid office was efficiently run, but overwhelmed. The waiting room filled with veterans of various ages facing their own battles with systems that often felt stacked against them. I recognized the 1,000-yard stare, in some the carefully controlled pain in others. My problems suddenly felt both significant and small in the context of this quiet community of service. My caseworker, Trevor Mitchell, was a former JAG officer who had lost his left leg in Iraq. He reviewed my situation with professional detachment. That gave way to controlled anger as he processed the details. "This is unfortunately common," he explained. "But that doesn't make it acceptable. Your son has essentially attempted to circumvent your autonomy while you were medically vulnerable. We're going to shut this down immediately." Trevor drafted emergency protective orders for my financial accounts and initiated a veterans emergency housing claim that would help offset my legal costs. By noon, we had legal safeguards in place for my most pressing concerns. "What about my home?" I asked as we finished. "We've filed for an emergency hearing regarding your unlawful eviction," Sarah replied. "But these things take time, even with expedited processing. The important thing is that your son can't access your accounts now, and we've documented the situation thoroughly." As we left the VA office, my phone rang with an unfamiliar local number. "Katherine Jennings," I answered. "Ms. Jennings, this is Warren Mitchell. I need to speak with you urgently about the inspection at your Westbrook Street property." I put the call on speaker so Sarah could hear. "Go ahead, Warren. My attorney is with me." "The inspection uncovered several concerning issues," Warren began, his usually measured tone indicating something significant had occurred. "Most notably, there's evidence of unauthorized structural modifications to the third floor where Barrett Design is located. They've removed a load-bearing wall to create an open-concept studio space." Sarah and I exchanged glances. "Is it dangerous?" I asked. "The building isn't at imminent risk of collapse, but it's definitely a code violation and a liability concern. I've informed the tenant that they need to have a structural engineer assess the situation immediately and implement recommended reinforcements." And how did my son respond to this news? I couldn't help asking. Warren hesitated. Mr. Barrett was unhappy. He claimed the modifications were minor and pre-approved, though our records show no such approvals. He became quite agitated when I mentioned possible lease implications. Thank you for handling this professionally, Warren, I said. Please keep me updated on developments. After ending the call, Sarah looked thoughtful. This could actually work in our favor. If Andrew violated his lease terms with unauthorized modifications, it demonstrates a pattern of disregard for proper procedures and agreements. The coincidental timing of the inspection findings struck me as almost poetic. Andrew's professional foundation was literally compromised by his own unauthorized actions, much as he had attempted to undermine mine. Back at the guest house, I spent the afternoon reviewing financial records and property documents, creating a comprehensive picture of my assets and legal standing. My military training and operational planning served me well. I approached the situation as I would a complex mission, identifying objectives, resources, potential obstacles, and contingency plans. Around 4 o'clock, my concentration was interrupted by a knock at the door. Through the security camera, I saw a young woman I didn't recognize, petite with dark hair pulled back in a professional bun, clutching a leather portfolio similar to those used at Andrew's firm. Cautiously, I opened the door. Can I help you? Ms. Jennings? I'm Cynthia Horowitz from Barrett Design. She glanced nervously over her shoulder. I hope it's okay that I'm here. Dr. Whitaker helped me find you. The administrative assistant who had sent the warning message. Please, come in, I said, showing her to the living room. Cynthia perched on the edge of the sofa, clearly uncomfortable. I want to apologize for contacting you the way I did. It's completely unprofessional, and if Mr. Barrett knew I was here, I'd lose my job immediately. Your message may have saved me from significant financial harm, I assured her. I appreciate your courage. She nodded, then opened her portfolio and removed several documents. After I messaged you, I started paying closer attention to what was happening at the office. Mr. Barrett has been meeting with attorneys and financial advisors almost daily. Yesterday, I overheard him discussing liquidating investment properties to finance a major expansion of the firm. My chest tightened. Investment properties that belong to me, I assume. Yes. He mentioned something about consolidating his mother's assets now that he had decision-making authority. She handed me the first document. This is a copy of a power of attorney form I found on the office printer. It has your name on it, but I examined the document, my blood running cold. It was indeed a durable power of attorney form with my name typed neatly in the appropriate spaces. The signature at the bottom was a reasonable approximation of my handwriting, close enough to potentially pass. I think so, Cynthia confirmed. And there's more. After the building inspector came yesterday, Mr. Barrett was furious. He called an emergency meeting with his partners and discussed moving the firm to a new location before, in his words, the building's ownership becomes an issue. She passed me several more documents, preliminary negotiations for office space in a new development across town, financial projections that included liquidating maternal assets, and most disturbingly, a draft agreement to sell my home to a developer interested in the property's potential for subdivision. How did you get these? I asked, leafing through the evidence of my son's breathtaking betrayal. Cynthia looked down. I'm responsible for document management at the firm. Everything passes through my desk for filing, and she hesitated. After hours, I may have accessed Mr. Barrett's email to confirm my suspicions. I know that's wrong, possibly illegal, but what he's doing to you is worse. I studied the young woman before me, wondering what had compelled her to take such risks for someone she barely knew. Why are you doing this, Cynthia? You're putting your job in jeopardy. Her expression hardened. 3 years ago, my grandmother was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. Within 6 months, My uncle had convinced a court to grant him guardianship, moved her to a facility, and sold her house, the house she'd lived in for 40 years. By the time my parents and I figured out what was happening, her savings were gone and her home belonged to someone else. She met my gaze directly. We fought it legally, but the damage was done. She died in that facility, confused and believing we had abandoned her. I promised myself I would never stay silent if I saw it happening to someone else. I reached across and squeezed her hand. "I'm so sorry about your grandmother, and so grateful you chose to act." "What will you do with this information?" she asked. "Use it," I replied simply. "Build my case, protect myself and my assets, and eventually confront my son with the truth of what he's done." Cynthia nodded. "I should get back before I'm missed. I've made copies of everything for you to keep." She hesitated at the door. "Ms. Jennings? For what it's worth, Mr. Barrett speaks highly of you to clients. Talks about how you raised him alone while serving in the military. He has your photos in his office." The information pierced me with fresh pain. "That makes this harder to understand, not easier." "People compartmentalize," she offered quietly. "They tell themselves stories that justify their actions. It doesn't excuse anything, but it might explain how someone can honor you publicly while betraying you privately." After she left, I called Sarah immediately to share the new evidence. Her response was swift and decisive. "This changes everything," she said. "Forgery of a power of attorney is a criminal offense. We need to alert the district attorney's office and file for an immediate injunction against any assets being moved or liquidated." That evening, Jim and Caroline invited me to dinner at the main house. I hesitated to burden them with my troubles, but found myself sharing the day's developments over Caroline's homemade lasagna. "The nerve of that boy," Caroline muttered, refilling my wine glass. "After everything you sacrificed." Jim's response was more measured. "Katherine, you've always been a strategic thinker. What's your endgame here? What outcome are you hoping for?" The question caught me off guard. In the whirlwind of protecting myself, I hadn't fully considered what resolution I wanted beyond securing my assets and home. "I want my house back," I said finally. "I want Andrew to understand the consequences of his actions, but—" I paused, the truth difficult to voice. "I don't know if our relationship can ever recover from this." "Perhaps that's not a decision you need to make yet," Caroline suggested gently. "Focus on protecting yourself first. The emotional reconciliation, if it's possible, can come later." I nodded, grateful for their wisdom. As I walked back to the guest house under a sky now cleared of rain, I felt a curious mixture of heartbreak and determination. Andrew had betrayed me in ways I could never have imagined, but I was not without resources or allies. In Cynthia, I had found not just an informant, but a genuine ally motivated by her own painful experience. Her willingness to risk her professional standing to protect a stranger from exploitation had restored some of my faith in humanity, even as my faith in my own son had been shattered. Tomorrow would bring more legal maneuvering, more evidence, gathering, and perhaps the beginning of a counteroffensive. For tonight, I would rest, secure in the knowledge that I was no longer fighting this battle alone. The next morning arrived with unexpected clarity. I woke before dawn, the habit of early rising ingrained from decades of military service. In the quiet darkness of the guest house, I reviewed my situation with the emotional distance that had served me well during battlefield crises. My son had betrayed me. This much was undeniable. He had forcibly removed me from my home while I was medically vulnerable, attempted to gain control of my finances through deception and forgery, and was actively working to liquidate my assets for his own benefit. The evidence was overwhelming and incontrovertible. Yet a mother's heart is stubborn. Some part of me still searched for explanations, for mitigating factors that might make his actions comprehensible, if not excusable. Had Vanessa's influence, pushed him in this direction? Was the pressure of impending fatherhood clouding his judgment? Had I somehow failed him as a mother, teaching him to value property and success over compassion and integrity? I shook away these thoughts as I prepared for the day ahead. Self-doubt was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. This was war. Not with enemy combatants, but with my own flesh and blood. And I needed the clear-headed focus that had kept me and my units alive in combat zones. Sarah arrived at 9, dressed in a crisp charcoal suit that signaled she was prepared for courtroom, battle if necessary. "We have a hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning regarding the emergency injunction," she explained, as we reviewed documentation at the kitchen table. "The judge assigned to the case has a strong record of protecting vulnerable adults from exploitation." "I'm not elderly or incapacitated," I reminded her, a point I found myself repeating often these days. "Of course not," Sarah agreed, "but legally speaking, the recent surgery and your son's attempts to characterize you as cognitively impaired place you within protected categories. It's advantageous for our case." I nodded, understanding the strategic value even as I disliked the implication of vulnerability. We spent the morning preparing my testimony, organizing evidence, and developing contingency plans for various legal scenarios. Around noon, my phone chimed with a message from Warren. "Mitchell, urgent development at Westbrook property. Please call when convenient." I excused myself to make the call, putting it on speaker so Sarah could listen. "Ms. Jennings," Warren began without preamble, "we have a situation. The structural engineer's assessment of the third-floor modifications is worse than initially thought. The wall removal has compromised not just that floor, but potentially the integrity of the floors below. He's recommending immediate installation of temporary support columns and a more comprehensive renovation to properly reinforce the structure." "What's the timeline and cost estimate?" I asked. "Initial stabilization needs to happen within 2 weeks. The engineer is preparing a detailed report, but preliminary estimates suggest at least $95,000 for proper remediation." I exchanged glances with Sarah. "And I assume Barrett Design is responsible for these costs under the terms of the lease?" "Absolutely," Warren confirmed. "The modifications were unauthorized and explicitly prohibited under Section 7.3 of their agreement. I've already informed Mr. Barrett of the situation and his financial responsibility." "How did he respond?" Warren's hesitation was telling. "He was resistant. Claimed the building had pre-existing structural issues that necessitated their modifications. He's demanding that ownership cover the costs." After finishing the call, Sarah looked thoughtful. "This creates interesting leverage. Andrew's firm would be contractually obligated to pay for significant structural repairs that might be financially challenging for the company based on what we know of their finances. Unless he's planning to use my money to fix his unauthorized modifications," I noted grimly. "A plan we've now legally prevented," Sarah reminded me. "The injunction covers all your assets, including those he doesn't yet know you control." The irony wasn't lost on me. Andrew's unauthorized removal of structural supports in the building mirrored his attempts to undermine the foundations of my independence and security. In both cases, he'd acted with arrogant disregard for established boundaries and potential consequences. After lunch, Sarah left for court filings while I focused on reviewing the documents Cynthia had provided. Each page revealed new aspects of Andrew's plan to appropriate my assets: real estate valuations of my properties, projected liquidation schedules, even a proposed trust structure that would give him control while providing me with a modest allowance. The methodical nature of the planning suggested this wasn't a recent idea born of opportunity when I needed it. At 3 o'clock, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Katherine Jennings," I answered cautiously. "Ms. Jennings, this is Dr. Gabriel Santos from Mountain View Assisted Living. I'm following up on your rather abrupt departure from our facility. His tone carried professional concern layered over what sounded like genuine curiosity. I explained the circumstances of my involuntary placement at Mountain View as concisely as possible. "I see," he replied when I finished. "This is disturbing, but unfortunately not unprecedented. Your son provided us with documentation suggesting you required our level of care, including what appeared to be a physician's assessment." A cold sensation washed over me. "May I ask what physician supposedly conducted this assessment?" "One moment." I heard papers shuffling. The evaluation was signed by a Dr. Raymond Vance from Westside Medical Group. I didn't recognize the name, which wasn't surprising since I received all my medical care through the VA system. "Dr. Santos, I've never been examined by Dr. Vance or anyone from Westside Medical. That assessment is fraudulent." His sharp intake of breath was audible. "Ms. Jennings, these are serious allegations, which can be verified by checking with the VA Medical Center, where I've received all my care for the past decade. My primary physician is Dr. Lydia Chen, who has recently conducted a thorough cognitive assessment confirming I have no impairments whatsoever." The call ended with Dr. Santos promising to investigate and potentially file a report with state regulatory authorities. I immediately called Sarah to update her on this new development. "Falsifying medical records is a felony," she said. "This adds another layer to the criminal aspects of your case. I'll request a subpoena for those records immediately." By evening, I felt mentally exhausted, but oddly energized. Each revelation of Andrew's deception clarified my path forward. The lingering doubts, the maternal instinct to find excuses for his behavior, were fading in the face of overwhelming evidence of calculated exploitation. I was about to prepare a simple dinner when my phone alerted me to an email from Warren Mitchell. The subject line read, "Westbrook Property, Lease Violation Documentation. Confidential." The email contained several attachments: the structural engineer's preliminary report, photos of the unauthorized modifications, and a notice of lease violation sent to Barrett Design. But it was the final attachment that caught my attention: security camera footage from the building's main entrance, dated 3 days after my surgery. Curious, I opened the video file. The footage showed Andrew entering the building late in the evening around 10 p.m., accompanied by a middle-aged man carrying a medical bag. They took the elevator to the 3rd floor where Andrew's firm was located. 40 minutes later, they reappeared in the lobby. The man handed Andrew what appeared to be documents, which Andrew reviewed before nodding and shaking the man's hand. As they parted, Andrew handed the man an envelope that the man quickly tucked into his jacket pocket. The timing was unmistakable. 3 days post-surgery, when I was still in the hospital, Andrew had brought someone who appeared to be a medical professional to his office after hours. Given what Dr. Santos had just revealed about the fraudulent medical assessment, the connection seemed obvious. I forwarded the footage to Sarah with a brief explanation of my suspicions, then sat back, a strange calm settling over me. This wasn't just opportunistic exploitation or misguided concern. This was calculated, premeditated fraud involving multiple criminal acts: forgery, falsifying medical records, attempting to gain control of assets through deception. My phone rang again. Cynthia. "Ms. Jennings," she began, her voice tight with urgency. "I need to tell you something. Mr. Barrett called an emergency partners meeting this afternoon after receiving notice about the structural violations. He was furious." "I imagine so," I replied. "The repairs will be expensive." "It's not just that," Cynthia continued. "He told the partners that he's working on a solution, that once he has control of his mother's assets, he'll use some of her investment properties as collateral for a business loan to cover the repairs and fund the firm's expansion." The casual entitlement in this statement, the assumption that my life's work was his to appropriate, left me momentarily speechless. "There's something else," Cynthia added, her voice dropping. "I was helping Ms. Barrett, Vanessa, with some design presentations yesterday, and she received a call from a real estate agent. They were discussing staging your house for a quick sale. Ms. Barrett mentioned they needed to move inventory quickly before any legal complications arise. She specifically said they needed to sell before you could cause problems. The final piece clicked into place. They weren't just taking my home for their growing family. They intended to sell it immediately for profit. The renovations weren't for their twins. They were to increase the property's market value. "Thank you, Cynthia," I said finally. "You've been invaluable." After hanging up, I sat in perfect stillness, processing this final revelation. The betrayal was complete, comprehensive, and coldly calculating. Any remaining illusions I had about Andrew's motivations evaporated. I pulled out my laptop and opened a secure folder containing documents I hadn't yet shared with Sarah. Contingency. Plans I'd developed during my military career for various scenarios, including one labeled Emergency Asset Deployment. Inside was detailed information about additional properties and investments not held under my primary identity, resources I'd established to ensure I would never be financially vulnerable. It was time to activate these resources. Not just to defend myself, but to send a clear message. Command Sergeant Major Katherine Jennings would not be victimized, exploited, or discarded. I began typing instructions to financial managers and property administrators I hadn't contacted in years, setting in motion a series of transactions and legal maneuvers that would take effect within 48 hours. By the time Andrew realized what was happening, it would be too late to counter. This wasn't just about reclaiming my home or securing my financial future anymore. This was about justice, establishing unequivocally that actions have consequences, that betrayal carries a cost, and that underestimating me had been my son's most profound mistake. Dawn broke with soft pink light streaming through the guest house windows. I had slept surprisingly well, the clarity that comes with decisive action providing a peace I hadn't felt since before the surgery. Military life teaches you that once the battle plan is committed, second-guessing only undermines execution. I dressed carefully in charcoal slacks and a navy blazer with my service pins discreetly attached. Not my full uniform, but a subtle reminder of who I was and what I had endured long before this current battle. For the court hearing, I wanted to project exactly what I was: composed, competent, and far from vulnerable. Over breakfast, I reviewed my strategy once more. The legal proceedings with Sarah would address the immediate concerns, blocking Andrew's attempts to control my assets and forcing his recognition that I could not be legally removed from my home. But the broader campaign required additional maneuvers, many of which were now in motion following my communications the previous evening. Sarah arrived precisely at 8, her briefcase bulging with documentation. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, studying my face. "More than ready," I replied, gathering my own materials. "I've faced hostile fire in 3 war zones. A courtroom holds no terror for me." The county courthouse was an imposing limestone building, its corridors bustling with the diverse dramas of human conflict, seeking resolution through law. We were directed to Courtroom 7, where Judge Eleanor Harmon presided over emergency injunctions and restraining orders. Andrew was already there, seated beside a silver-haired attorney I didn't recognize. Vanessa sat behind them, her expression a careful mask of concern. My son glanced up as we entered, his eyes widening slightly at my appearance. Perhaps he had expected me to look diminished, confused, or broken. The flash of uncertainty that crossed his face was the first victory of the day. Sarah and I settled at the plaintiff's table, arranging our documents with practiced efficiency. I felt rather than saw Andrew's gaze return to me repeatedly, likely trying to gauge my mental state and level of preparation. Judge Harmon entered promptly at 9, a compact woman with shrewd eyes and decisive movements. After the formalities, she reviewed the filing with remarkable thoroughness for an emergency hearing. "This is a request for emergency injunctive relief filed by Katherine Jennings against Andrew Barrett," she summarized. "The petitioner alleges unlawful eviction, attempted financial exploitation, and falsification of medical documentation. She looked up, her gaze direct. These are serious allegations. Let's begin with the petitioner's statement. Sarah presented our case with surgical precision, laying out the timeline of events beginning with my surgery and concluding with the discovery of the forged power of attorney and falsified medical assessment. She entered into evidence Dr. Chen's cognitive evaluation, the building security footage, and statements from Mountain View's Dr. Santos regarding the suspicious circumstances of my admission. Throughout her presentation, I maintained perfect military posture, my expression neutral but alert. This disciplined composure was not an act, but a return to my essential self, the commander who had led troops through crisis after crisis, making life-or-death decisions under pressure that most civilians couldn't imagine. When Andrew's attorney rose to respond, his strategy became immediately apparent. Your Honor, this case represents a regrettable family misunderstanding exacerbated by Ms. Jennings' recent health challenges. My client acted out of genuine concern for his mother's welfare following major surgery and what medical professionals identified as concerning cognitive symptoms. I nearly laughed aloud at this characterization, but maintained my composure as he continued spinning a narrative of a devoted son, making difficult decisions for an aging mother experiencing post-surgical confusion. Furthermore, the attorney added smoothly, the property in question is partially owned by my client through inheritance rights from his father. He has legal standing to determine its usage and sale. Judge Harmon listened impassively, occasionally making notes. When both sides had presented their initial arguments, she addressed me directly. Ms. Jennings, are you comfortable making a statement to the court? I am, Your Honor, I replied, standing as I'd done countless times when reporting to superior officers. For the next 15 minutes, I detailed my military service, my medical history, and the events following my surgery with the precise clarity of a mission debrief. I explained how I had raised Andrew alone after his father's abandonment, working my way up through the ranks while ensuring my son had every opportunity for success. Your Honor, I am not an elderly woman suffering from dementia or confusion. I am a retired command sergeant major who underwent necessary surgery to remove shrapnel sustained during my final deployment. I have been declared cognitively sound by multiple medical professionals. The documentation submitted by my son to justify my removal from my home and the attempt to control my finances was falsified, as evidence shows. I concluded by addressing the property claim directly. Regarding ownership of my home, while my ex-husband retained a technical interest in the property, the divorce decree explicitly granted me lifetime occupancy rights. This document has been submitted as Exhibit C. Furthermore, my son's claim that he acted out of concern for my welfare is contradicted by evidence that he and his wife planned to immediately sell my home for profit, as demonstrated in the communications. Submitted as Exhibit G, Judge Harmon studied me for a long moment before turning to address the courtroom. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both parties, and I find sufficient cause for emergency relief. I am issuing a temporary injunction prohibiting Andrew Barrett from entering, selling, or transferring the property at 742 Oakwood Lane pending full hearing. I am also freezing all attempts to access or control Katherine Jennings's financial assets through power of attorney or other means. She looked directly at Andrew. Mr. Barrett, the evidence suggesting falsification of medical records and forgery of legal documents is concerning enough that I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review. This court takes very seriously any attempt to exploit vulnerable individuals, particularly those who have served our country. Andrew's face had paled visibly. His attorney leaned over, whispering urgently in his ear. We will reconvene for a full hearing in 2 weeks, Judge Harmon concluded. In the meantime, Ms. Jennings is to have immediate access to her residence, with sheriff's deputies to accompany her if necessary to ensure compliance. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell with satisfying finality. As people began to move, I caught Andrew's gaze across the courtroom. For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, perhaps recognition of the magnitude of his miscalculation, or simply the dawning realization that his plans had collapsed. Outside the courtroom, Sarah was jubilant. That went even better than expected. Judge Harmon rarely refers matters to the DA from preliminary hearings. "What happens next?" I asked, watching as Andrew and Vanessa huddled with their attorney further down the corridor. "The sheriff's department will arrange to accompany you to your residence this afternoon. You'll have full access to your home and belongings. Andrew and Vanessa will need to vacate immediately." "And the criminal implications?" Sarah's expression turned serious. "That depends on the DA's assessment, but forgery and falsifying medical records are felonies. Andrew could be facing serious charges." I nodded, feeling no satisfaction at this prospect despite everything. "Let's focus on reclaiming my home first. The rest can follow in due course." As we walked toward the exit, Andrew suddenly broke away from his group and approached us. Sarah moved protectively closer to my side, but I gestured for her to give us space. "Mom," he began, his voice low and urgent, "this has gotten completely out of hand. We need to talk privately, without lawyers." I studied my son's face, the face I had once known better than my own. The familiar features were now animated by something foreign and calculating. "I don't think that would be productive, Andrew," I replied evenly. "The court has spoken. I'll be returning to my home this afternoon." "You don't understand," he insisted, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. "The firm is in a precarious position financially. The building repairs, the expansion plans, we've committed to projects we can't easily back out of. We need to find a family solution to this situation." The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, facing legal consequences for his actions, his concern was for his financial commitments, not for the damage he had done to our relationship or my well-being. "A family solution," I repeated, the words tasting bitter. "Like forging my signature? Falsifying medical records? Attempting to sell my home while I was recovering from surgery?" His expression hardened. "You've always been dramatic. I was trying to arrange things efficiently for everyone's benefit. The house is too large for you, the maintenance too demanding. The assisted living facility offers appropriate care. I was handling the financial aspects to secure your future and help with our expansion. It made practical sense." "Practical for whom?" I asked quietly. "Certainly not for me." "For all of us," he insisted. "The family legacy, the Barrett name." "The Barrett name," I echoed, suddenly understanding something fundamental. "Not the Jennings name. You've been trying to erase me from your narrative. For years, haven't you? The single mother who raised you, the military career that paid for your education, these don't fit the polished image you've created." A flush crept up his neck. "That's ridiculous. This was about practical arrangements, not some psychological drama." I shook my head, feeling an odd sense of clarity. "No, Andrew. This was about convenience and greed disguised as concern. The court saw through it, and now, finally, so do I." Sarah stepped forward. "Mr. Barrett, I suggest you direct all future communications through legal counsel. Given the potential criminal charges, anything you say to Ms. Jennings could have significant implications." Andrew's attorney called his name sharply from across the corridor, clearly alarmed by our conversation. With a last frustrated glance at me, Andrew turned and walked away. As we left the courthouse, I felt the weight of both victory and loss. I had won this initial battle and would soon reclaim my home, but the war had exacted a terrible price. The relationship with my only child appeared damaged beyond repair. That afternoon, accompanied by 2 sheriff's deputies, I returned to the home I had been forcibly removed from weeks earlier. Andrew and Vanessa had cleared out hastily, leaving evidence of their interrupted renovation plans, paint samples taped to walls, a contractor's estimate for kitchen remodeling on the counter, furniture rearranged to accommodate their taste, rather than mine. As the deputies confirmed the house was now secure, I walked slowly through the rooms, reacquainting myself with the space that had been mine for decades. Despite the victory, it felt somehow different, the sanctuary compromised by the knowledge of how easily my son had violated its boundaries. When the deputies left, promising to patrol regularly for the next few days, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. It was time to implement the next phase of my plan, not just reclaiming what was mine, but establishing unmistakably that such a betrayal would have lasting consequences. I sent a brief, coded email to my financial manager. Proceed with Operation Y. Clarify. Within hours, Andrew would discover exactly who owned the building housing his architectural firm, and just how precarious his professional future had suddenly become. The first night back in my own home was strangely unsettling. Though surrounded by familiar possessions, the space felt subtly violated, as if Andrew and Vanessa's brief occupation had left an invisible residue of betrayal on the walls and furniture. I found myself checking locks twice, startling at ordinary house sounds, and sleeping fitfully despite my physical exhaustion. By morning, however, military discipline reasserted itself. I rose at 5, performed a series of gentle stretches mindful of my healing surgical incision, and mentally prepared for the day's objectives. Today would mark the beginning of Andrew's education in consequences, a lesson long overdue. At precisely 9 o'clock, Warren Mitchell would be hand-delivering a letter to Barrett Design Associates, informing them of 3 critical developments. First, that Katherine Jennings was the sole owner of Valor Properties LLC, the company that owned their building. Second, that due to unauthorized structural modifications, their lease was technically in default. And third, that they had 30 days to either restore the building to its original condition or negotiate new lease terms with substantially increased rent to cover the necessary structural reinforcements. The timing was deliberate. 9 o'clock was when Barrett Design held its weekly all-hands meeting, with partners, architects, and support staff gathered in the main conference room. Warren would request to address the full team, ensuring maximum impact. At 9:15, my phone rang. Mom. Andrew's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. What the hell is this about? Some property manager just interrupted our staff meeting claiming you own our building? Good morning, Andrew, I replied calmly. I see Warren has delivered my message. Is this some kind of sick revenge? You own Valor Properties? I established. The LLC 15 years ago when I purchased the building. I thought it might provide security for both of us, a stable location for your business at below market rent, and a reliable investment for my retirement. Ironic how things turn out, isn't it? His breathing was audible through the phone. You've been my landlord all this time and never told me? I wanted you to succeed on your own merits, not feel indebted to me. Besides, would it have mattered? Given recent events, it seems you have little regard for my property rights, whether you're aware of them or not. This is absurd, he snapped. You can't just change the terms of our lease because you're angry about a family disagreement. A family disagreement? I repeated, incredulous. Is that how you characterize forging my signature, falsifying medical records, and attempting to sell my home while I was recovering from surgery? You're blowing everything out of proportion. I was trying to make sensible arrangements for everyone's benefit, including the benefit of selling my home for profit, while confining me to an assisted living facility I neither needed nor wanted. His silence was telling. The lease violations are real, Andrew, I continued. Your unauthorized removal of structural supports has compromised the building's integrity. As your landlord, I have every legal right to require remediation or adjustment of terms. We can't possibly afford the repairs or increased rent right now, he said, his voice suddenly less commanding. The expansion plans, Vanessa's pregnancy, we're extended to our limit. That sounds like a business management problem. Not a landlord problem, I replied, echoing the dismissive tone he had used when I'd called about my surgery. Perhaps you should have considered the financial implications before modifying a building. You don't own. This is vindictive, he accused, using your hidden ownership to punish me. No, Andrew, this has consequences. Something you appear to have limited experience with. After a tense silence, his tone shifted to something closer, to the son I remembered, the one who would negotiate for later curfews or extra allowance with careful persuasion. Look, Mom, we both know things got out of hand. What will it take to resolve this situation reasonably? We need to find a workable solution for both sides. Both sides, I repeated, as if we're equal parties who had a minor disagreement, rather than your systematic attempt to strip me of my home, autonomy, and assets. I never intended. Intentions are irrelevant, I interrupted, channeling my command voice. Actions and their consequences are what matter now. If you want to discuss solutions, I suggest you bring your partners and attorney to my home this evening at 7. I'll have my legal representation present as well. After a moment's hesitation, he agreed, and we ended the call. I immediately contacted Sarah to brief her on the development and request her presence at the meeting. Her response was immediate and supportive. This is an excellent strategic move, she said. Bringing his partners into the discussion forces Andrew to confront his actions in front of those with a financial stake in the consequences. The hours before the meeting passed with deliberate preparation. I arranged the dining room table with formal precision, legal documents in labeled folders, financial statements clearly organized, and seating arranged to subtly reinforce power dynamics. I would sit at the head of the table with Sarah to my right. Andrew and his contingent would face us from the opposite end, symbolically and literally distanced. Diane arrived at 6 to provide moral support and practical assistance. Are you sure you're up for this? She asked, noting the careful way I moved, still mindful of my healing incision. More than ready, I assured her. This confrontation has been building since I woke up in the hospital and found myself alone, except for you. Jim and Caroline Whitaker also appeared, bringing a casserole for afterward and their solid, reassuring presence. Just like preparing for a high-stakes negotiation with tribal leaders in Afghanistan, Jim noted with grim humor. Except these adversaries share your DNA. Sarah arrived at 6:30, impeccably prepared with additional documentation and a clear negotiation strategy. Remember, the goal is resolution that protects your interests, not emotional satisfaction, she reminded me, though sometimes those can align nicely. At precisely 7, the doorbell rang. Andrew stood on the porch with Vanessa beside him, both dressed in business attire as if attending a corporate negotiation rather than a family reckoning. Behind them were Martin Chen and Eliza Okafor, Andrew's business partners, both looking uncomfortable, and their attorney, Howard Kleinman. I welcomed them with cool professionalism, directing them to the dining room where the formal seating arrangement made clear this was not a casual family discussion. Andrew's eyes narrowed at the sight of Jim and Caroline stationed in the living room, visible but not part of the immediate proceedings. I wasn't aware this would be a public event, he said tightly. These are trusted friends providing support, I replied. Given your recent actions, I thought it prudent to have witnesses to our discussion. Once everyone was seated, I opened the meeting with direct, unembellished facts. We're here to address 2 interconnected situations. First, the attempted appropriation of my home and assets through fraudulent means, including forgery and falsified medical documentation. Second, the lease violations at the Westbrook property owned by Valor Properties, LLC, of which I am the sole owner. Andrew's partners exchanged alarmed glances. Clearly, they hadn't been fully briefed on the first situation, and possibly not on the full implications of the second. For clarity, I continued, I'll summarize recent events. I then proceeded to outline, with military precision, The sequence from my surgery through Andrew's attempts to gain control of my assets to the discovery of the building ownership connection. Martin Chen, the oldest and most senior of Andrew's partners, looked increasingly disturbed as I spoke. "Andrew," he finally interrupted, "you told us your mother was experiencing cognitive decline and needed assisted living care. You never mentioned forged documents or falsified medical assessments." Andrew shifted uncomfortably. "That's Mom's interpretation of events. The reality is more nuanced." "Nuanced?" Eliza Okafor repeated skeptically. "Either you did or didn't forge her signature and falsify medical records. Those aren't nuanced actions. The immediate issue," their attorney interjected smoothly, "is the building lease and alleged violations. Perhaps we could focus on resolving that matter tonight." Sarah leaned forward. "The issues are inseparable, Counselor. Mr. Barrett's actions regarding Ms. Jennings' home and assets directly inform how Valor Properties chooses to address the lease violations. This isn't merely a landlord-tenant dispute. It's part of a pattern of behavior that requires comprehensive resolution." I nodded in agreement. "Exactly. I'm willing to discuss reasonable accommodations regarding the building issues, but only in the context of full accountability for all recent actions." For the next hour, we engaged in intense negotiation. Andrew's partners, now fully aware of the situation's gravity, became increasingly concerned about both their legal exposure and the firm's viability if forced to cover major structural repairs or relocate on short notice. "We had no knowledge of Andrew's actions regarding his mother's affairs," Martin insisted. "That was personal, not company business." However, Eliza added pragmatically, "the building modifications were company decisions we all approved, though Andrew assured us the necessary permissions had been secured." Andrew remained largely silent during this exchange, his expression alternating between defensive and Finally, I presented my terms. Barrett Design would acknowledge the lease violations and commit to proper structural remediation over a 6-month period. I would not increase their rent during this time, but would require them to cover all repair costs. Additionally, Andrew would formally rescind all claims to my home, return any documents or items removed during my absence, and provide a written account of all attempts to access or control my financial assets. "And the potential criminal charges?" their attorney asked cautiously. "I have not yet decided whether to pursue criminal complaints," I replied honestly. "That will depend significantly on Andrew's actions moving forward." Andrew finally spoke directly to me, his voice carefully modulated. "And our relationship? What becomes of that?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. The others at the table shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware they were witnessing something deeply personal within the formal negotiation. I looked at my son, truly looked at him, for the first time since this ordeal began. Behind the professional facade and calculated expressions, I glimpsed something unexpected. Fear. Not just fear of legal consequences or professional damage, but a deeper uncertainty. In challenging me, he had discovered I was not the easily manipulated, gradually declining mother he had convinced himself I was becoming. He had awakened something he didn't fully understand. The commander who had led troops through combat, the woman who had raised him alone while building a military career, the veteran who had carried shrapnel in her body for 15 years without complaint. "That," I said finally, "will depend on accountability, restitution, and genuine remorse, not for getting caught, but for the betrayal itself. Our relationship as it existed before is gone, Andrew. Whether something new can be built from the ruins remains to be seen." He held my gaze for a long moment before nodding slightly. "I understand." After additional negotiation on specific terms, Sarah drafted a preliminary agreement that all parties signed. Andrew's partners left quickly afterward, their relief at avoiding immediate lease termination tempered by new wariness toward their younger colleague. As the door closed behind them, Andrew lingered in the entryway. Vanessa already heading toward their car. "Mom?" he began, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. "Not tonight, Andrew," I said quietly. "We've established the practical framework. The emotional reconciliation, if it's possible, will require much more time." He nodded again, a gesture that acknowledged the boundary without necessarily accepting it, then turned and walked out into the evening darkness. When they had gone, my support team gathered in the living room, the tension gradually dissipating as we reviewed the meeting's outcome. "You were magnificent," Diane declared, pouring wine for everyone except me. I was still on post-surgical medication. "Strategic and measured," Jim agreed. "You gave him just enough rope to hang himself professionally without destroying his future." "Completely." Sarah reviewed her notes with professional satisfaction. "We achieved all our primary objectives and most of the secondary ones. The agreement protects your interests while allowing for potential reconciliation if circumstances warrant." I accepted their praise with quiet gratitude, but inside I felt hollow. The confrontation, necessary as it was, had finalized the transformation of my relationship with Andrew from mother and son to adversaries seeking settlement. The victory felt Pyrrhic, essential, but devastating. Later, alone in my bedroom, I studied old photographs, Andrew's graduation, his wedding, casual moments of family happiness that now seemed to belong to strangers. I traced his face in a childhood photo, remembering the small boy who had once looked at me with uncomplicated love and absolute trust. "What happened to us?" I whispered to the silent image. The question had no answer, at least not tonight. I carefully returned the photos to their places and prepared for bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges in this unfamiliar terrain of family estrangement and potential reconciliation. The confrontation had established boundaries and consequences with unmistakable clarity. Whether those boundaries would become permanent walls or eventual bridges remained to be seen. The days following the confrontation settled into an uneasy rhythm. I reclaimed my home room by room, erasing the subtle alterations Andrew and Vanessa had begun during their brief occupation. The contractors they had scheduled arrived, confused by the change in plans, only to be sent away with polite explanations that their services were no longer required. Paint samples were removed from walls, catalog pages for nursery furniture disappeared from countertops, and the spaces slowly returned to my preferred arrangement. Physical recovery from my surgery progressed steadily. Dr. Chen pronounced me healing well at my follow-up appointment, though she continued to monitor for any complications from the extended period of shrapnel migration. "You're remarkably resilient," she noted during an examination, "both physically and emotionally." "Military necessity," I replied with a slight smile. "You adapt, or you don't survive." The legal aftermath of Andrew's actions unfolded with bureaucratic deliberation. Sarah maintained regular contact, updating me on filings, responses, and procedural developments. The district attorney's office had opened an investigation into the forged documents and falsified medical records, but hadn't yet determined whether to pursue criminal charges. "They're proceeding cautiously," Sarah explained during one of our update calls. "Cases involving family members can be complex, especially when the potential victim expresses ambivalence about prosecution." "I'm not ambivalent about the seriousness of what Andrew did," I clarified. "Just uncertain about whether criminal charges serve any constructive purpose at this point." "Understood. The DA's office knows you haven't ruled anything out, which maintains pressure on Andrew to comply fully with the civil agreements." Warren Mitchell provided weekly reports on the Westbrook building situation. True to the signed agreement, Barrett Design had commissioned proper structural assessments and begun the process of installing temporary supports while developing a comprehensive remediation plan. "Mr. Barrett has been unusually cooperative," Warren noted during one update, his tone suggesting surprise. "He's personally overseeing the structural work and has been meticulous about documentation and permitting." I nodded, unsurprised. Andrew had always been conscientious about professional obligations, even when his personal ethics became flexible. Moreover, his partners were undoubtedly watching his every move after discovering his deception about my condition and the building ownership. Through these practical matters, Andrew maintained formal, careful communication, emails regarding the building repairs, texts confirming return of items from my home, a registered letter officially rescinding any claim to my property. Each communication was proper, detailed, and entirely devoid of personal content or acknowledgement of the damage he had caused to our relationship. Vanessa remained completely silent. No calls, no messages, not even formal communications through attorneys. Her absence spoke volumes about how she viewed our family connection, a relationship of convenience, valuable only when it served her and Andrew's interests. 3 weeks. After the confrontation, Diane convinced me to join her for lunch at Riverfront Park, a welcome change from the isolation I had unconsciously imposed on myself. As we walked along the waterfront path, enjoying the spring sunshine and watching river barges navigate the current, she broached the subject I'd been avoiding. "Have you decided how you want to move forward with Andrew?" she asked gently. "Beyond the legal and financial arrangements, I mean." I considered the question carefully before responding. "I'm still processing what happened. The betrayal goes deeper than just the practical actions. It's the realization that my son was willing to sacrifice my autonomy, security, and dignity for his own convenience. That's not something you forgive quickly, if ever." "Of course not," Diane agreed. "But, eventually, you'll need to decide what kind of relationship you're willing to have moving forward. Complete estrangement, limited contact with strict boundaries, or some path toward genuine reconciliation. Right now, I'm focusing on establishing those boundaries," I admitted, making it unmistakably clear that what happened cannot be minimized or repeated. We continued walking in comfortable silence before Diane spoke again. "There's something else we should discuss: the twins." The mention of Andrew's unborn children sent an unexpected pang through my chest. Despite everything, these would be my grandchildren, blood of my blood, innocent of their parents' actions. "What about them?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "They'll be born in a few months. Have you thought about what role you want to have in their lives, if any?" I hadn't allowed myself to consider this complex dimension of the situation. The thought of being estranged from my grandchildren stirred a deep sadness. Yet the prospect of interacting with Andrew and Vanessa regularly filled me with apprehension. "I don't know," I admitted. "The children shouldn't suffer for their parents' actions, but I can't imagine any comfortable arrangement given the current circumstances." Diane nodded understandingly. "You don't have to decide anything now." That evening, alone with my thoughts, I found myself in Andrew's old bedroom, now converted to a home office, but still containing boxes of his childhood memorabilia I'd never discarded. I opened one carefully labeled Andrew School Projects and removed a construction paper creation from his 3rd grade class, a What I Want to Be assignment, featuring a crayon drawing of a small boy in an army uniform standing beside a stick figure woman also in uniform. "I want to be a soldier, like my mom," the childish handwriting declared. "She is brave and helps people and keeps everyone safe." I traced the faded drawing with my fingertip, remembering the proud little boy who had presented it to me after school, beaming with uncomplicated love and admiration. When had that child transformed into the calculating adult who saw me as an obstacle to his ambitions? Was it a gradual erosion or a sudden shift? Had I missed warning signs over the years? Too busy with my career? Or too blinded by maternal pride to notice? These questions had no satisfying answers, only the painful reality of the present situation. I carefully returned the drawing to its box and closed the lid, both literally and metaphorically containing these memories that no longer aligned with current truth. The following morning, I received an unexpected call from Martin Chen, Andrew's senior business partner. "Ms. Jennings," he began formally, I hope I'm not intruding, but there's a matter I felt compelled to discuss with you directly rather than through intermediaries. Go ahead, Mr. Chen, I replied, curious about this unusual contact. Our firm has been completing an internal review following recent events, he explained, his tone carefully professional. During this process, we discovered something concerning. It appears Andrew used company resources to investigate your financial holdings and property investments over the past 18 months, well before your recent medical issues. He also consulted with a succession planning attorney using firm funds, ostensibly for business purposes, but actually regarding transfer of your assets. The revelation struck like a physical blow. Not only had Andrew's actions been calculated, but they had been in planning for over a year, a long-term strategy rather than an opportunistic response to my surgery. I see, I managed, my voice steady despite the fresh wave of betrayal washing over me. May I ask why you're sharing this information? Martin's response was measured but direct. Professional integrity requires it, while loyalty to a partner is important. What we discovered crosses ethical lines I'm not willing to ignore. Additionally, as the building owner, you should be aware of potential misuse of resources in a property you control. After thanking him for his candor, I sat motionless at my kitchen table, absorbing this new information. 18 months of planning. Andrew had been methodically researching my assets, developing a strategy to take control of them, long before my surgery provided a convenient opportunity. The premeditation was stunning in its coldness. I called Sarah immediately to relay this development. This significantly changes the narrative, she said after hearing the details. It transforms the ATI situation from potentially misguided opportunism during a health crisis to long-term premeditated exploitation. If you decided to pursue criminal charges, this information would substantially strengthen the case. That's not my immediate concern, I replied. What matters now is establishing absolutely clear boundaries with Andrew based on this new understanding of his actions. After consulting with Sarah, I drafted a formal letter to Andrew, detailing the new information I had received and its implications for our future relationship. The language was precise, unemotional, and unambiguous. Given recent revelations about the extent and duration of your planning regarding my assets, I am establishing the following non-negotiable boundaries. All communication must be in writing, either email or formal correspondence. No phone calls or unscheduled visits will be accepted. Any discussion of financial matters must include my legal representation. You will provide a complete written disclosure of all investigations, planning, and actions taken regarding my financial affairs over the past 2 years. Regarding your children, my future grandchildren. While I have no desire to deny them a relationship with their grandmother, any visitation will initially be supervised by a neutral third party of my choosing, likely Diane. I am removing you as beneficiary from my will and as my healthcare proxy. These decisions are non-negotiable and final. The letter concluded with a statement that these boundaries would remain in place indefinitely, with potential modifications only after demonstrated accountability and genuine change over an extended period. Sarah reviewed the document before I sent it, suggesting minor adjustments to strengthen its legal clarity. This establishes unequivocal parameters, she noted. It also makes clear that these aren't punitive measures, but necessary protections based on demonstrated behavior. I had the letter delivered by courier the following morning, requiring Andrew's signature to confirm receipt. His response came 3 days later, a brief email acknowledging receipt and acceptance of the stated boundaries, followed by the requested disclosure of his investigations into my finances. The disclosure document was comprehensive and disturbing, confirming Martin's information while revealing additional efforts I hadn't known about. Andrew had methodically researched every property, investment, and account I possessed, documented my routines and activities looking for signs of decline he could highlight to medical professionals, and even investigated potential guardianship, proceedings long before my surgery was necessary. Reading through the clinical description of his plotting, I felt a curious detachment, as if I were reviewing intelligence about a stranger rather than my own son. The emotional pain remained, but it was now contained within boundaries of my own creation, managed through the disciplined compartmentalization I had developed during my military career. That evening, I finalized arrangements with my estate attorney to completely restructure my will and financial plans. Andrew would receive a token inheritance acknowledging his legal status as my son, but nothing more. The bulk of my estate would be divided between veterans support organizations, educational funds for my grandchildren that Andrew and Vanessa couldn't access, and a newly established foundation to assist elderly individuals facing exploitation from family members. These changes weren't motivated by vindictiveness, but by clear-eyed assessment of reality. Trust, once fundamentally broken, couldn't be automatically restored through promises or temporary compliance. The boundaries I had established were not walls built from anger, but necessary fortifications protecting my autonomy, dignity, and remaining years. As I signed the final documents, I felt a weight lift, not the burden of betrayal, which would remain for some time, but the uncertainty about how to proceed. The path forward was now defined by boundaries that honored both the pain of what had happened and the possibility, however remote, of some new relationship emerging from these ashes in the distant future. For now, this was enough. I was secure. In my home, my financial independence was protected, and I had reclaimed the power to define the terms of engagement with the son who had so profoundly betrayed my trust. The command sergeant major in me recognized this as a strategic victory, even as the mother in me mourned what had been lost along the way. Summer arrived with unusual intensity, the heat wave reflecting my internal state, a carefully controlled burn kept within established parameters. My physical recovery progressed steadily. By July, Dr. Chen declared me fully healed from the surgery, though emotional recovery remained an ongoing process. The boundaries I had established with Andrew functioned exactly as intended. Our communications remained formal, written and focused primarily on the building repairs and legal resolutions. He provided monthly updates on the structural remediation, each report meticulous and professionally prepared, as if submitting to a particularly demanding client rather than his mother. Through these restricted channels, I learned that Barrett Design had scaled back its ambitious expansion plans, focusing instead on financial stability following the unexpected expenses of the building repairs. Several of their high-profile projects continued, however, and the firm maintained its reputation in the architectural community despite the internal upheaval. Diane kept me informed about Andrew and Vanessa's preparations for the twins' arrival, information she gleaned through mutual acquaintances rather than direct contact. They had abandoned plans to renovate and sell my home, instead purchasing a more modest house in a family-oriented suburb. From social media posts Diane occasionally shared, I gathered that Vanessa's pregnancy was progressing normally, with delivery expected in early September. I maintained careful emotional distance from these developments while acknowledging the complex reality that these children would be my grandchildren, regardless of my relationship with their parents. With Diane's encouragement, I quietly arranged for 2 substantial education funds to be established for the twins, structured legally, to prevent Andrew or Vanessa from accessing the money for any purpose other than the children's education. "They'll never know I did this," I explained to Diane as we completed the paperwork. "The notification will come when the children turn 18. By then, they'll be old enough to understand the complexities of family relationships for themselves." Diane squeezed my hand, understanding both my protective boundaries and the grandmotherly instinct that transcended them. My life settled into new patterns. I volunteered twice weekly at the VA hospital, working with recently returned veterans, navigating the often bewildering transition to civilian life. I joined a water aerobics class recommended by my physical therapist, building strength and flexibility while forming connections with other active older adults. I even began dating casually, nothing serious, just occasional dinners with Jim Whittaker's brother-in-law Thomas, a retired history professor with a dry wit and respectful manner. These activities constructed a life that was full and meaningful, independent of my identity as Andrew's mother. It was a necessary recalibration after decades of defining myself primarily through my military career and maternal responsibilities. In mid-August, nearly 5 months after the confrontation in my dining room, the first crack appeared in the formal facade Andrew had maintained. It began with an email that departed from his usual businesslike tone. "Mom, I know our communication has been restricted to practical matters, and I understand why. The boundaries you've established are justified given my actions. However, Vanessa's doctor has scheduled a C-section for September 3rd. The twins have been diagnosed with twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome, which, while being managed, has created some complications. While both babies appear healthy, the delivery carries additional risks that have forced us to confront difficult possibilities. This situation has prompted considerable reflection. If you're willing, I would like to meet in person to discuss some matters that are difficult to address appropriately in writing. I'm not asking for any changes to the legal or financial arrangements we've established, nor am I seeking any specific outcome beyond the opportunity for direct conversation. If you're amenable, perhaps we could meet at a public location of your choosing with Diane present if that would make you more comfortable. Andrew." I read the message several times, analyzing it as I would intelligence from a questionable source. The mention of pregnancy complications seemed genuine, twin-to-twin. Transfusion syndrome was a specific medical condition that suggested he wasn't fabricating a crisis for manipulation. The acknowledgement of my boundaries and the offer to meet on my terms with Diane present indicated at least surface-level respect for my position. Still, skepticism born of betrayal made me cautious. Was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or another strategic move in a long game I didn't fully understand? I forwarded the email to Sarah, seeking her professional assessment. "From a legal perspective, there's no apparent risk in meeting under the conditions he's proposed," she replied. "The boundaries remain legally enforceable regardless of any conversation. The question is whether you personally feel ready for direct interaction." That question required deeper consideration. Was I emotionally prepared to face Andrew in person, to hear whatever he wished to discuss without the protective filter of written communication? The military strategist in me recognized that information gathered directly often carried nuances lost in written reports. The mother in me, that persistent, wounded part, admitted a curiosity about what had prompted this outreach after months of formal compliance. After consulting with Diane, who agreed to accompany me, I replied to Andrew's email with typical precision. "I am willing to meet this Saturday at 2 p.m. at Riverside Cafe. Diane will attend. 1 hour maximum. Please confirm." His confirmation came within minutes, suggesting he had been waiting anxiously for my response. Saturday arrived with clear skies and moderate temperature, a brief respite from the summer heat. I dressed with deliberate care, a casual but crisp linen outfit that projected both competence and composure. Diane picked me up at 1:30, her expression a mixture of concern and cautious optimism. "Remember," she said as we drove, "you're in control of this interaction. You can end it at any point if it becomes manipulative or unproductive." "I commanded troops in active combat zones," I reminded her with a slight smile. "I can handle 1 hour with my son in a public cafe." We arrived early, securing a table on the outdoor patio with good visibility and appropriate privacy. Another habit from my military days, always assessing tactical positioning even in civilian settings. Andrew arrived precisely at 2, alone, and carrying a leather portfolio similar to the one I had brought. The professional symmetry wasn't lost on me. He looked different somehow. Thinner, with subtle shadows beneath his eyes suggesting recent stress or lack of sleep. He wore business casual attire despite the weekend, his wedding ring catching the sunlight as he approached our table. "Mom," he greeted me with formal caution. "Aunt Diane, thank you for agreeing to meet." I nodded acknowledgement, gesturing to the chair across from me. "You mentioned matters you wanted to discuss." After ordering beverages, coffee for Andrew, iced tea for Diane and me, an awkward silence descended. Andrew seemed to be gathering his thoughts, fingers tapping lightly on his portfolio. "The twins will be born in 2 weeks," he finally began. "2 girls. We've decided to name them Emma and Grace. Grace, my name." The unexpected gesture momentarily disarmed me, though I maintained my composed expression. "The complication I mentioned is being monitored closely," he continued. "The doctors are optimistic, but it's certain reckonings." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Confronting potential vulnerability of people you love has a clarifying effect." "I imagine it does," I replied neutrally, unwilling to make this conversation easy for him. "I've spent months complying with the boundaries you established," Andrew said, opening his portfolio and removing a document. "I've respected the limitations on communication, provided the information requested, and accepted the consequences of my actions without complaint. But compliance isn't the same as accountability, and I recognize that distinction now." He slid the document across the table, not a legal filing or financial statement, but what appeared to be a personal letter, handwritten rather than typed. The heading read simply, "What I did and why it was wrong." "This isn't a request for forgiveness," he explained as I glanced at the densely written pages. "It's an acknowledgement of specific actions and their impact, written as part of therapy I've been attending for the past 3 months." This revelation surprised me. Andrew had always dismissed therapy as unnecessary introspection, preferring action and forward momentum to reflection. "The pregnancy complications weren't the only catalyst," he continued. "Martin and Eliza presented me with an ultimatum after discovering the extent of my planning regarding your assets. Either I seek professional help understanding my behavior, or they would dissolve our partnership. They were right to demand it." He gestured to the letter. "My therapist suggested writing this as a step toward genuine accountability, identifying specifically what I did, acknowledging why it was wrong, and recognizing the impact on you, not just legally or financially, but emotionally as well." I scanned the first paragraph, which began with stark simplicity. "I systematically planned to take control of my mother's assets while creating a false narrative about her cognitive decline. I manipulated medical information, forged legal documents, and violated her trust and autonomy for my financial benefit and convenience." The bluntness of the admission was unexpected. Previous communications had been carefully worded to acknowledge mistakes and misunderstandings, while avoiding such direct statements of intentional wrongdoing. "This doesn't change anything about our legal arrangements," Andrew said, watching my reaction carefully. "The boundaries you established remain appropriate and necessary. I'm not asking for their removal or modification." "Then what are you asking for?" I questioned directly. He met my gaze steadily for the first time since his betrayal had been exposed. "A path forward, not a return to what was before. That's impossible, and perhaps wasn't as healthy as I pretended it was, but some framework for building something new, especially with the twins arriving." "You've had months to consider this," I observed. "What framework do you envision?" Andrew opened his portfolio again, extracting a second document. "I've drafted a proposal, not legal terms, but personal commitments I'm prepared to make regarding our interaction moving forward." The document outlined specific behaviors, continued transparency about financial matters, regular accountings of any interactions involving my name or information, advance notice of any social media posts that might reference me, and most significantly, an acknowledgement of my autonomy in determining my relationship with my grandchildren. I understand that trust can't be rebuilt through promises alone, he concluded. These commitments would need to be demonstrated consistently over time, with the expectation that violations would result in further restrictions rather than understanding or forgiveness. His approach was surprisingly measured and self-aware, lacking the entitled assumption of forgiveness that had characterized his attitude during our confrontation months earlier. Whether this represented genuine growth or simply a more sophisticated strategy remained uncertain. And Vanessa? I asked. What's her position on this path forward? Andrew's expression tightened slightly. We've had difficult conversations about her role in what happened. She acknowledges her participation, but has struggled more with accepting full responsibility. She's agreed to respect whatever arrangement we establish but isn't prepared for direct interaction yet. The honesty about Vanessa's limited accountability was peculiarly reassuring, an acknowledgement of continuing complications rather than a pretense of perfect resolution. I need time to consider this, I said finally, gathering the documents. This isn't a decision I can or should make during a 1-hour cafe meeting. I understand, Andrew replied, expectation tempered with resignation. I appreciate you being willing to listen. As we prepared to leave, he hesitated, then added softly, regardless of what you decide about future interaction, I want you to know that I recognize the damage I've caused, not just to our legal or financial relationship, but to your sense of security and your trust in me as your son. That understanding doesn't fix anything, but I thought you should know it exists. The statement carried a weight of genuine regret that caught me unprepared. I nodded acknowledgement, unwilling to offer empty reassurances, but recognizing the significance of the admission. Diane and I watched him walk away, his shoulders carrying a burden visibly different from the entitled confidence he had projected during our confrontation months earlier. What do you think? Diane asked as we drove home. Is it genuine? Parts of it seem to be, I replied cautiously. The acknowledgement of specific wrongdoing without excuses or justifications is new. The recognition that trust can't be immediately restored shows some understanding of consequences. But 5 months of therapy doesn't erase decades of personality, formation, or 18 months of calculated planning. No, she agreed, but people can change when properly motivated. The twins, his partnership at risk, legal consequences, those are powerful motivators. In the following days, I reviewed Andrew's written accountability statement and proposed commitments multiple times, analyzing them with the same attention I once gave to field intelligence reports. I discussed them with Sarah, with Jim and Caroline, and most extensively with Diane, weighing perspectives and considering implications. Eventually, I composed a measured response, establishing clear parameters for limited incremental interaction. There would be no immediate restoration of casual family relationships, no pretense that the betrayal hadn't fundamentally altered our connection. Instead, there would be carefully structured opportunities to demonstrate whether the expressed accountability translated to sustained behavioral change. The twins, Emma and Grace, deserved the chance to know their grandmother if circumstances allowed. My son deserved the opportunity to prove whether his apparent insights were genuine. And I deserved the protection of boundaries that honored the severity of what had occurred while leaving space for potential, gradual healing. This wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It was simply acknowledgement that even the most damaged relationships exist on a spectrum of possibilities, with total estrangement at one end and conditional, carefully monitored interactions somewhere in the middle. For now, that middle ground seemed the most appropriate territory, neither naively optimistic nor permanently closed to evolution. September arrived with a gentle transition from summer's intensity to autumn's contemplative coolness. The changing season mirrored my internal landscape, still cautious, still bounded by necessary protections, but gradually opening to new possibilities within carefully established parameters. On September 3rd, exactly as scheduled, Emma and Grace Barrett entered the world through emergency C-section after complications intensified in the final days of Vanessa's pregnancy. Andrew maintained our communication boundaries even during this emotional time, sending a formal email with their birth details. Emma Katherine Barrett, 5 pounds 3 ounces, born at 8:17 a.m. Grace Diane Barrett, 4 pounds 11 ounces, born at 8:21 a.m. Both girls were healthy despite their early arrival, though they would remain in the neonatal intensive care unit for monitoring due to their slightly premature status and the complications of their shared placenta. The middle names struck me with unexpected force, Katherine and Diane, acknowledgments of the two women who had raised Andrew. Quiet olive branches extended through these innocent new lives. I sat with the knowledge for several hours, allowing myself to feel the complex emotions it evoked without immediately responding or making decisions based on sentiment alone. That evening, I sent a brief but sincere congratulatory message acknowledging the honor of the naming choice while maintaining our established communication boundaries. I included a small gift, 2 hand-knitted blankets I had created during my recovery period, each in different but complementary shades of green, deliberately avoiding the stereotypical pink that Vanessa would likely favor. I had begun these projects months earlier, a grandmother's instinct persisting despite the complicated family circumstances. Andrew's response came the following day, a simple thank you accompanied by a photograph of the twins in their NICU incubators, each wrapped in one of my blankets. The image carried no manipulation or expectation, just documentation of a moment that connected us despite everything that had transpired. The twins remained in the NICU for 2 weeks, their progress documented through Andrew's regular updates. When they were finally cleared to go home, he sent a more personal message. The girls are thriving now, gaining weight and developing distinct personalities already. Emma is vocal and demanding, while Grace watches everything with unusual focus for a newborn. The doctors say they're doing exceptionally well considering the complications. If you're open to it, we would like to schedule a time for you to meet them once they've settled at home and their immune systems are stronger, perhaps in 3 weeks. This would be entirely on your terms regarding location, duration, and who is present. Diane would be welcome as your support person, of course. I understand if you're not ready for this step. There's no pressure or expectation and no consequences to declining. The offer remains open indefinitely. This message, like our cafe conversation, struck a tone distinctly different from the entitled Andrew who had attempted to claim my home and assets. The acknowledgement that I might decline, the absence of emotional manipulation, the clear statement that the invitation carried no expiration date, these elements suggested continued therapy and genuine effort to respect boundaries. After careful consideration and consultation with Diane, I agreed to a brief visit in early October with specific parameters. The meeting would take place at Diane's home rather than Andrew and Vanessa's, would last no more than 1 hour, and would focus solely on the twins rather than broader family reconciliation. The appointed day arrived crisp and bright, autumn colors painting the landscape with transition and transformation. I arrived at Diane's 30 minutes early, arranging myself in her comfortable living room and conducting breathing exercises to manage the anxiety that had built despite my military discipline and extensive preparation. At precisely the scheduled time, Andrew arrived carrying 2 infant carriers. He entered alone, explaining that Vanessa had developed a mild cold and had stayed home to avoid exposing the babies to illness. Whether this was truth or convenient excuse to avoid a potentially awkward interaction remained unclear. But her absence simplified the dynamics of this first meeting. Andrew set the carriers gently on Diane's sofa, adjusting them so I could see both infants clearly. "Mom, Aunt Diane, I'd like you to meet Emma and Grace," he said simply, his voice carrying genuine pride despite the complex circumstances. The twins were identical at first glance, with delicate features and wisps of dark hair that resembled Andrew's baby photographs. Looking closer, I noticed subtle differences: Emma's slightly rounder face, Grace's more pronounced eyebrows that arched in an expression reminiscent of my own mother. "They're beautiful," I said softly, emotion finally breaking through my careful composure. "May I hold them?" Andrew nodded, carefully lifting Grace first and demonstrating proper head support before placing her in my arms. The weight of this tiny human, my granddaughter, named partly for me, created a sensation both familiar and entirely new. I had held Andrew this way once, feeling the same mixture of awe and protective instinct, yet this moment carried additional layers of complexity and awareness. As I cradled Grace, studying her features and allowing her tiny fingers to grasp my index finger with surprising strength, I noted Andrew watching with an expression I couldn't immediately categorize. Not calculation or manipulation, but something vulnerable and uncertain. Perhaps the recognition that this moment represented both continuation and profound change in our family narrative. We passed the next 45 minutes in surprisingly comfortable interaction, focused entirely on the twins, their development, and their medical journey. Andrew answered my questions with straightforward information, neither embellishing for sympathy nor minimizing the challenges they had faced. When Emma became fussy, he demonstrated practiced skill in soothing her, revealing the devoted father beneath the professional exterior. As our agreed-upon hour approached its conclusion, Andrew carefully returned both girls to their carriers for the journey home. Before leaving, he handed me a sealed envelope. "This isn't something that requires immediate response," he explained. "Just some thoughts I wanted to share about moving forward, completely separate from today's visit." After he left with the twins, Diane and I sat in contemplative silence, processing the encounter that had been both more and less emotional than anticipated. The visit had focused exclusively on the twins as planned, without attempts to address the fractured relationship between their father and grandmother. Yet beneath this practical interaction had flowed undercurrents of our shared history and uncertain future. "They're perfect," Diane finally said, voicing what we both felt. "Whatever happens between you and Andrew, those girls deserve to know their grandmother." "Yes," I agreed quietly. "They're innocent of their parents' actions. My relationship with them should be independent of past betrayals." Later that evening, alone in my home, I opened Andrew's envelope. Inside was not the formal proposal or legal language I had half expected, but a simple handwritten letter. "Mom, thank you for meeting Emma and Grace today. Regardless of what happens between us, knowing they will have you in their lives matters more than I can adequately express. I've been thinking about something you said during our confrontation months ago that I've been trying to erase you from my narrative for years. You were right. For too long, I've been constructing a professional and social identity that minimized your contribution to my life and success. The self-made architect, the Barrett name carrying forward without acknowledgement, of the Jennings Foundation that made everything possible. This erasure made it easier, I think, to justify taking what was yours. If I diminished your role in my life story, your continued autonomy and ownership seemed less significant, more negotiable. My therapist calls this cognitive distancing, creating psychological space that allows unethical behavior toward those we should protect and honor. I'm working to recognize and correct this pattern, not to earn forgiveness, but because it represents a fundamental flaw in my character that I don't want to pass to my daughters. I want Emma and Grace to know their grandmother not as an obstacle or resource, but as the remarkable woman who served her country, raised her son alone, and demonstrated extraordinary resilience when that son betrayed her trust. If you're willing, I would like to establish a regular schedule for you to spend time with the twins, with whatever boundaries and supervision you deem necessary. This isn't conditional on reconciliation between us. It's separate, focused solely on your relationship with your granddaughters. For our relationship, I can only continue demonstrating through actions rather than words that I understand the why, gravity of what I did, and am committed to whatever healing might be possible, however limited or gradual. Andrew. I read the letter several times, analyzing its tone and content with the careful assessment that had become second nature. Unlike previous communications during our conflict, this contained no subtle manipulations, no implicit expectations of forgiveness, no attempt to minimize actions or shift responsibility. It acknowledged specific wrongdoing, recognized the pattern behind it, and proposed a path forward focused on the twins rather than premature reconciliation. Whether this represented genuine transformation or simply more sophisticated strategy remained uncertain, but the consistent pattern over months suggested at least the possibility of authentic change. In the days following that first meeting with the twins, I established careful parameters for ongoing interaction. Monthly visits initially, always, with Diane present, gradually increasing in frequency and duration as trust incrementally rebuilt. Andrew accepted these terms without complaint or expectation of accelerated progress. By December, these structured visits had developed a comfortable rhythm. The twins grew rapidly, developing distinct personalities that became more apparent with each interaction. Emma remained the more vocal and expressive of the pair, while Grace observed her surroundings with unusual intensity, seeming to absorb and process information with remarkable focus for an infant. During one December visit, as Christmas preparations filled Diane's home with festive warmth, Andrew arrived with the twins and an unexpected proposition. The Architectural Association is honoring veterans through a special project, designing transitional housing for female veterans facing homelessness or housing insecurity, he explained, after settling the twins in their portable playpen. Given your military background and current volunteer work with veterans, I thought you might be interested in consulting on the project. Your perspective would be invaluable in ensuring the designs meet actual needs rather than just theoretical criteria. The offer surprised me. Professional collaboration rather than forced family reconciliation. Recognition of my military expertise rather than just my maternal role. It represented a potential bridge between our separate worlds that acknowledged my identity beyond being his mother or the twins' grandmother. I'd need to review the project details before committing, I replied, professional instinct engaging with the proposition on its merits rather than emotional implications. Of course, Andrew agreed readily. I've brought the preliminary documentation. For your consideration, there's no pressure or timeline. The association would be fortunate to have your input at any level you might consider appropriate. This respectful approach, maintaining boundaries while offering meaningful engagement, continued a pattern of behavior that suggested genuine effort to establish a new type of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than familial obligation or manipulation. As winter deepened toward the new year, I found myself in a place I couldn't have imagined during those dark days after discovering Andrew's betrayal. Not naive reconciliation or forced forgiveness, but a carefully constructed new reality, where boundaries remained clear while allowing measured interaction focused primarily on the twins but occasionally extending to areas of shared professional interest. Vanessa gradually reappeared during these structured visits, her initial awkwardness eventually settling into polite, distant cooperation. She never addressed the betrayal directly, nor did I expect her to. Our relationship existed now primarily as co-participants in the twins' lives, rather than as mother and daughter-in-law in any meaningful sense. The building housing Barrett design underwent complete structural remediation, bringing it not just to code compliance but improved condition. Andrew oversaw the work personally, ensuring quality exceeded requirements rather than merely meeting minimum standards. As the landlord relationship normalized into professional interaction, Warren Mitchell continued to provide regular reports, noting that Andrew had become a model tenant, perhaps compensating for past violations through exemplary current behavior. When the twins celebrated their first Christmas, I found myself invited to a small family gathering at Diane's, neutral territory that honored established boundaries while allowing celebratory interaction. The invitation specified no gifts necessary, but I arrived with 2 carefully selected children's books, each inscribed with a simple message connecting past to future. For Emma Katherine, with love from your grandmother, and for Grace Diane, with love from your namesake. Andrew noticed the inscriptions, recognition flickering in his expression, not just of the message itself, but its significance. For the first time, I had publicly acknowledged my role as grandmother to his daughters, a small but meaningful step toward whatever new family configuration might eventually emerge from the damage of betrayal and the healing of boundaries. As the new year approached, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 12 months, from the shock of surgery and betrayal to the careful construction of a new identity and community that honored both what had been lost and what might still be possible. The military strategist in me recognized that we had reached not an endpoint, but a sustainable position. Neither complete estrangement nor naive reconciliation, but a carefully negotiated middle ground with clear boundaries and incremental progress. The grandmother in me treasured growing connections with Emma and Grace, relationships unburdened by the weight of adult betrayals, and the woman at the center of these identities acknowledged both the pain that remained and the strength that had carried me through this battlefield I never expected to face. Sitting on my porch on the year's final evening, watching snow gently blanket the neighborhood, I felt a quiet peace that wasn't forgiveness exactly, but something adjacent to it. Acceptance of what had happened, appreciation for what remained, and openness to whatever might yet evolve within the protective boundaries I had established. My son had kicked me out after my surgery, unaware that I owned his company's building. That single fact had shifted the power dynamic decisively, revealing his vulnerability even as he sought to exploit mine. But the true revelation hadn't been about property or assets. It had been about identity and worth extending beyond family roles or material possessions. Command Sergeant Major Katherine Jennings had survived combat zones, raised a son alone, built a career and investment portfolio through discipline and foresight, and now had weathered perhaps her most personal battle: betrayal by the child she had sacrificed everything to raise. That survival didn't require either blind forgiveness or permanent estrangement, but the courage to establish and maintain boundaries that honored both the pain of betrayal and the possibility of something new emerging from its ashes. As midnight approached, I raised a glass in silent toast, not to easy resolution or artificial harmony, but to the strength found in boundaries, the peace discovered in self-definition beyond family roles, and the community formed not through obligation but through genuine care and respect. Some relationships shatter beyond repair. Others transform through crisis into something different but enduring. Which path mine with Andrew would ultimately follow remained uncertain, but I faced that uncertainty with the quiet confidence of a woman who had reclaimed not just her home and assets, but her fundamental identity as someone whose worth existed, independently of others' recognition or betrayal. That, perhaps, was the most valuable property of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.